Hello, this is Miriam Chavez. This is video blog 3. I'm going to get started with the first question, and it reads, What is eugenics and how did eugenics inform the legal case known as Madrigal versus Quinnigan? And eugenics, it's the science of improving race by breeding desirable genes. So this was used in the States back in the beginning of the 1900s. And we saw that it was used again during the 70s. And it's basically just wanting to improve the genes of the American citizens, keeping them of a higher standard, breeding out all the undesirables. And in this case, we saw that it was affecting specifically the Mexican Americans, the Hispanics. We see that there was so many cases where, specifically in this case, there were several cases that the woman signed the documentation of being, so that the doctors could tie their tubes after the C-section. They signed it right before, when they were already out of it, right before they were going to be put in under the anesthesia. Or they would say, you know what, your husband already signed it, so you might as well. So they would sign it. Or there was papers that weren't even signed. And the whole point of this, it was being done so that these women wouldn't have more kids, because they already had a lot of kids and they were breeding undesirable Mexican kids, basically. So they would produce that surgery where they would tie their tubes. And it started where it was just people with mental disabilities, whether it be just mental disabilities. And so that these people with mental disabilities could get married and they wouldn't have to worry about procreating. But then it went into criminals, where now they were doing those surgeries to criminals. And then it ended up being where it was mostly African Americans and Hispanic women that were being affected by this action of tying the tubes, where in most cases it was without their consent or half of their consent, because they were just under so much pain already. We're going to move on to the second question that reads, what roles did gender and sexuality play in the outcome of the legal case presented in the film Southwest of Salem? First of all, I had never heard of this case, and it just blew my mind. The video was so touching, and it was just horrible what happened to these women. And we see that sexuality, they were lesbians. And you see how at the beginning of the film, they're even saying, why was the fact that they were lesbians even coming up in the trial? They didn't think that it was, because the whole trial was about them sexually assaulting the 7-year-old and the 9-year-old gangbang. But eventually it came out that they were lesbians, and everything was around that. What really impressed me was when we saw a clip where the lawyer that was defending the little girl said, that's what gay people do. That's what gay people do. They rape people. That was actually the argument. And it just completely blew my mind that was such a huge part of the case. And when we go into gender, I mean, these people were supposed to be women. They were supposed to like men. That's what culture said was acceptable. How men like women, women like men. And these women were kind of breaking those barriers. And because of that, it was just thought that they did it. And it wasn't how they brought in so many things where it was thought that it was some type of cult, and they were trying to do so many things to the kids, and that's how you would break them. It was just, it blew my mind, everything that was being said. And we see how they spent almost 20 years of their lives, and as there were just no facts. We see how the kids, whenever they would go up there, they would say so many things that didn't align with what said that there was a gun, but then there wasn't. Just so many different things. We see the only evidence, which I know took a huge role, was what the doctor said, that after they reviewed the girls, that there probably was, they probably were sexually assaulted. But then we see how at the end, the Dr. Kellogg says that, well, no, based on the science of 20 years ago, he thought that, but now she was saying, no, it wasn't true. That movie was just it was really touching, really emotional. Now going into question 3, where it's saying, using critical analysis of the materials of Learning Module 2, provide your educated guess as to why most states in the U.S. are adverse or against teaching ethnic studies, Chicano studies, African American studies, etc. in public schools. First of all, we saw that's what they said during the movie The Precious Knowledge. The government, the school district, when I say they, that's what I mean. They think they're teaching the kids about revolution, about revolting, about hating the white people. And I think it's so true. I mean, it's almost like they don't want them to know what happened. And I don't think they really understood. I mean, we saw how the people from the school district, everyone refused to actually go because they said if they went to the class, they would change the class. They wouldn't see it as actual how it's taught. But it seems like they were just scared. Basically, they didn't know what it was and they were scared. And it was easier to think that they were just being taught about revolting, about hating the white man. But it wasn't about that. We see in this movie specifically, we saw how a lot of these kids, they don't find themselves. There's not a place for them in regular schools. They feel confused. They don't feel like they fit in. And they're just apathetic to the whole school. But in these classes, we see how it teaches them a little bit of who they are, who their ancestors were. And we see how in the classes they would say little quotes, or they would start by saying, don't hurt anyone because by hurting someone, I'm hurting myself. And little things where we saw that it was giving them almost an entity, giving them of who they are, and it helped them to solve all the different conflicts of their lives, because a lot of these kids that attend to these classes, obviously they are Hispanic. They have been affected by the immigration system. They've been affected by so many different laws because of their background, of their heritage. And we see how these classes were helping them understand and teaching them a little bit of their culture. And I think in the States, they are against it because they don't understand and they don't see that it's just teaching them of their past. It would be like if they didn't want us to learn about what everyone did to the African Americans, because then the African Americans would hate the white people. No, it's past. It's part of their past. It happened and they're learning about it. And so that they know what they don't have to put up with. And I think that's what they don't understand, that it wasn't teaching them. Whenever they mentioned that, they're talking about Cesar Chavez, about Che Guevara, about all these people that obviously they're communist, whatever, the American government didn't like. But they were using their philosophies of helping people, of we are all one in the world. And I think that's something that they didn't want to see, or they just didn't see. I'm not sure. But I thought by far this was my favorite module. I learned so much. The 2 videos that we saw were just emotional, and they just brought up to light a lot of the things that I wasn't aware that were happening, because they didn't affect me specifically, because here in El Paso, for the most part, we're all Hispanic. So I really don't see a lot of the issues that we saw there. So it was very interesting. And that's about it. Thank you.